Okay, do I have your permission to record?
Yes, you do.
Okay, great. Thank you for coming on. Really appreciate the opportunity to do an interview. Normally the way we do this is we ask you to introduce yourself, who you are, your background, and how we came to have this conversation today so that it's exactly how you want to be described, sir.
Okay, so would you like me to say just a little bit about myself and how I was contacted?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So my name is Steve Kershnar. I am a philosophy professor at the State University of New York at Fredonia. I was many years ago. I was briefly a lawyer, and I have an interest in political philosophy and issues of legitimate government authority. I was contacted via email from Marcus Ruiz Evans as a result of a column that I wrote for the Dunkirk Fredonia Observer.
And you are you
So,
are you are a professor at a New York university.
yes, I am. I am a distinguished teaching professor at SUNY Fredonia, which is one of the state universities in New York.
Is that a law school, or do you teach in the law school area?
No, I teach in the philosophy department. It's not a law school.
But you
Um,
but you do
so
have a law
I'm a
background.
philosopher. I do. I was briefly a lawyer. Yes.
Okay, I just got to establish that so that when we get to it, we're talking to someone who does have a background in law and does have an academic background. Because some of the things I think in the article were they made sense to me, but these are considered somewhat radical topics by a lot of people across America. What roughly was the article about, and roughly what were your conclusions that you were trying to showcase in it?
So my conclusions were, I mean, the way I got into this is I was rewatching Ken Burns' Civil War documentary, which I think is superb. And I was wondering whether or not the southern states had a legal right to secede. There's a separate issue as to whether they, morally should have seceded and whether the North should have
Sure.
um, engaged in the war. But I was more interested in the legal issue than the moral issue. And it seemed to me, on sort of looking at it, reading various articles, reading through the Constitution, that it's probably the case, not entirely clear, but probably the case that the southern states had a right to secede. And I base that on a few things. One is it looks like that at least some of the founders at the time understood it that way, and it's probably the case that people at the time that the Constitution was ratified understood it that way. And second, the structure of the Constitution seems to support the ability of states to secede. And third, it makes sense. It sort of parallels other areas of common law related to withdrawing from partnerships and, when a contract is valid. So 3 areas, roughly kind of the intention of the people who ratified it, and the understanding of the people at the time, second, the structure of the Constitution, and third, the kind of parallel to other areas of law. So that was my overall thought process.
I really liked your points about a couple things. One was the Constitution doesn't say anywhere that you can't secede. Am I correct? That phrase is nowhere,
That's
anywhere.
I can't find where it says the Constitution succeeded. It does say that the federal law is supreme, but that doesn't address whether or not you can draw from the whole federal system.
Right.
So I don't see where it disallows succession.
And you had pointed out the historical precedents that America. So you had the Articles of Confederation, which said that they were, permanent, unbreakable, and then they broke them and formed the Constitution as we have it now. And I think your point was, how can you say the Constitution says you can never leave when the document before it, that basically everybody was part of, also said the same thing, and they quickly got out of that contract?
Right, that's right. And I think the same thing applies to whom they permitted Texas to withdraw from Mexico, despite Mexico's constitution not allowing it. So yeah, I mean, there's pretty clear precedent that they thought it was okay to break these constitutions. It's unclear why they wouldn't have allowed it here. In addition, there's just an issue of sort of constitutional interpretation. The people who wrote the Constitution and ratified it were well aware of this issue. And you would have thought if they had strong feelings about it, or thought the Constitution should address it that they would have addressed it in a direct and explicit manner. They didn't do so, and it's not from lack of awareness of the issue or its importance.
Yeah. The thing that always I found curious was uh, people would say Constitution bans secession. I can't tell you the number of lawyers and professors of law who just say the Constitution bans secession. And I'm thinking, where? Where does it do
Yeah,
that? And could you answer this question? Why is it
sure.
that so many professors and lawyers and professors of law, when they get on TV, they say Constitution bans secession? Why do they say that when
So
it's not mentioned?
yeah, I mean, I don't know prior to the Civil War why they would think that. I could see. I don't agree, but I could see a more plausible case being made for succession being legally prohibited from the 14th Amendment Citizen and Privileges and Immunities Clause. I mean, I don't think they do so, but at least, more plausible case to be made. But before the Constitution, I don't see it. And again, as you pointed out, the Constitution is silent in the matter. In addition, the fact that the people who drafted the Constitution and ratified it were well aware of this issue. They didn't put it in there. The structure of the whole U.S. system and the precedents, the things like the Articles of Confederation, I have no idea where they have that much confidence from.
Yeah, so let's predate it. Before 14th Amendment and after 14th Amendment. So you have the 14th; it's there. Why are lawyers, professors? What are they thinking? To an average person, what are they looking at with the 14th Amendment and saying, well, that says you can't secede? Because when I look at the 14th Amendment, it doesn't say anything about secession. So where's this coming from? How? Could you explain the thinking to a non-academic?
So I think one approach to this um, issue is to think that the 14th Amendment protects, um, it says that you're a citizen of the federal government, right, of the United States.
Sure.
So you might think that for example, it says no state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunity of the citizens of the United States. Um, and all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. So the argument could be that if a state were to secede from the Union, it would prevent someone from being a citizen of the United States anymore. Or if the state were to secede from the Union, that a person would no longer have the privileges and immunities of the United States. So on that reading, the 14th Amendment does establish, does prevent a right to succeed. The reason I'm skeptical is the way I read that is it's saying that insofar as the state is a member of the United States, that its citizens have those features. But I don't think it says that a state can't withdraw and therefore deprive those features. And again, there's kind of an issue of clarity. I mean, if that was what was intended, there's a strong case to say that this should have been made very explicit, particularly that they had just lost 620,000 human lives over the war. That there was sort of a very clear reason to be explicit on this matter.
That would be my understanding is you want to make sure this never happens again. You control the Congress, right? Because the North absolutely controlled the Congress afterwards. The Southerners weren't even really allowed to be in power. So you have total control. You can write whatever laws you want. And no one writes down saying you can't secede after, like you said, almost close. All these people die and you have total control. You can pass any laws you want and no one thinks to say that. Why? What does that mean?
Yeah, I agree with you for that matter. I find that exceedingly strange. The other thing which is interesting is if you look at some of Lincoln's reasoning, not all of it, but some of his reasoning, um, you could see that his one of the main justifications that he put forth for going to war, the Civil War, was the need to preserve the Union. But it's not clear that some states seceding destroy the Union. Unless you view the Union as existing, as being constituted by and only by the states that were present at the time, and of course it's not the case because later on you could add further states. So it's an odd view in the sense that it didn't seem that the southern states were destroying from the Union; they were withdrawing from it. In the same way that if I were to lose a limb, it's not like I cease to exist. And if the United States were to lose some states, it doesn't seem that it ceases to exist. So it's a little hard to follow exactly what Lincoln's reasoning was in terms of justifying as a legal matter, justifying the prevention of states from leaving the Union.
And what gets me also is that in the Civil War, some southern states seceded, but not all. So the Confederacy is formed of states that initially broke off and then other ones who didn't initially break off. They didn't support the South. They didn't leave the North either. They waited until there was actual shooting and then they joined, which some have said, well, if some states heard that southern states wanted to secede and they didn't join them, but they also didn't back the North in criticizing them, then that means that those states understood that you could legally secede. And the only reason they left the Union and joined the Confederacy was because they saw federal government troops shooting at civilians.
Right. And the other evidence to think that there was a right to secede is that a number of the presidents, a number of the leading figures, including one of the most important founding fathers, I'm going to mispronounce his name, but Governor Morris, and people like President James Buchanan, Vice President John C. Calhoun. These are people who weren't that far off from the founding of the nation, and presumably have some connection to the people who did ratify it, and they thought there was a right to succeed. Now, other American leaders didn't, such as Andrew Jackson, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay. So it really is kind of a mixed bag, but still, there's some pretty central figures, for to put it this way, and really it's the best way to make sense of the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions. In which they very clearly reserve the right to judge whether the federal government was violating the contract that is the Constitution. It's hard to see why they wanted to preserve that right for independent judgment unless they thought that were they to judge that the federal government had violated the contract, they should then succeed from it. So, there's some leading figures, again, the evidence is mixed, but some leading figures understood the right to succeed. And, the Kentucky and Virginia resolution, I think some evidence, sort of a moderate strength, that that some of the people, the leaders of major states, viewed there as a right to succeed.
And I got to point out, 1812. Whenever I see people say you can't secede, they never bring up, I believe it was New Hampshire. In 1812, the British were here. They were fighting Americans. And one of the states holds talks with the British government about seceding from America and becoming part of the British government again. No one brings that up. 1812.
Yeah, I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Yeah,
I was unaware of that.
It was New Hampshire or Connecticut, one of those two states. And the interesting thing is that the rest of America criticized and hated the people in that state so much in the newspapers, but no one said you don't have the legal right to do that. So what does it say that in 1812, about 35 years after the only about 25 years after the Constitution's formed, so long enough that there would still be people alive who could remember that, we're saying, yeah, we want to secede and we're going to join England again, and nobody in all of America says that's illegal. What does that say?
Right. Yeah, I'm unaware of that. That is an interesting point. But like I said, I don't have any background on that. So that's certainly interesting. Though.
Yeah. Well, and I like to point out that you're from New York, right?
Yes.
And I'm from California. We're left, we're liberals, we're not arch-right conservatives. We're just talking about what the law says. And so you can still be against this, the South holding slaves, and you can still be for, yes, it need to be undone. But these are legal questions that deserve a impartial understanding. Am I right?
I completely agree with you. And my view is what the law says is independent of what the law should say. So, regardless of whether someone sort of agrees or disagrees with whether or not the Constitution should allow for secession, the question is whether it did allow for secession. And again, I think it's more likely than not that it did. I mean, there's all sorts of things that people might or might not like with regard to the Constitution. But there's a separate issue as to whether or not those amendments should still be respected if they have the meaning that, once we have their correct meaning. For example, there's a debate as to whether or not the Second Amendment protects individuals' rights to own guns. If you think that it did, and I do think that, then you might think, look, people have this legal right. Why do you think they should have this right or not? It's just a separate issue.
Right. And to bring it back to the possible correct interpretation of the law, that the 14th Amendment, which does not talk about secession in any form, could theoretically be interpreted to now bar secession after the Civil War, meaning that today you could say it's illegal to secede, maybe based upon some reading of the 14th Amendment. What they're saying with that is that everybody has the right to be a U.S. citizen and you can't take that away. Okay, so what if, say, California left legally, peacefully, no harm, no foul, everybody's okay, we somehow come to some sort of agreement, and California says we're gone. But they say, hey, everybody in California, you have dual citizenship. You're a California citizen, and everybody who had American citizenship retains that. And we will not deny them any rights in the U.S. Bill of Rights. In California, outside of gun ownership, you actually have more rights here in California, enshrined in our California Constitution, than in the American Constitution, except for guns. That is the one big difference, but right to privacy, other things. So if a state left and they guaranteed the American Bill of Rights and they didn't take citizenship away from Americans, much the way that Americans operating in Europe, you can travel to Europe, you're still a U.S. citizen unless you renounce that, right?
What was the question? What was that?
So if a state left and it said everybody retains their American citizenship, would that be a way to get around this interpretation of the 14th Amendment precluding secession, sir?
Yeah, I don't think it would, and here's why. The Constitution in Article 6 says that federal law is supreme. And if a state were to withdraw from the Union, presumably federal law would not be supreme. And as such, if you thought, and again, I doubt that it does, but if you thought that you're entitled to the privileges and immunities of the federal government, you might think one of these privileges and immunities is to be judged first and foremost by federal law. So I'm worried about the supremacy clause preventing sort of dual citizenship that you're discussing. I mean, perhaps I just don't see it working. I don't see that you could satisfy the supremacy clause with the sort of dual citizenship approach.
Okay. You talked about Texas versus White, I believe, in the article.
Yes.
And Texas versus White was a Supreme Court decision decided. Well, could you walk the listeners through what was Texas versus White, and why is it important in this talk?
Well, what I think is relevant, leave aside the actual legal issue, which is kind of tricky, of an essay, in some ways. We can sidestep it. What was interesting is whether or not Texas had succeeded from withdrawing from the United States, and the majority opinion argued that a state cannot secede. But if you look at its reasoning, it doesn't really provide this reasoning. It really just flat out asserts it. It provides a sort of a few arguments from the perception of the structure of the Constitution. But by and large, it takes the form of a just series of assertions, and I just don't see what the argument for that is. It doesn't track the way in which we normally decide what it is the Constitution says. And in any case, I just don't think there are any particularly strong reasons provided in support of that position.
No, there's one of the things that interests us is there's a phrase in Texas versus White, and I'm not disagreeing with anything that you're saying. It resembles a lot that I've read. But there's a phrase in Texas versus White that says, and I think it's the one that talks with, you can't secede. The Constitution was, permanent. But it says, unless you have consent of the states. So in that phrase, it says you can't unilaterally secede, but it also talks about, well, maybe you could if you have consent of the states. We've fought a lot of arguments out here to get the news out here to admit that Texas versus White exists, and that it does say with consent of the states it might be possible. Is that, given this is the only Supreme Court case to ever mention secession, would that be a possible legal route to gaining independence with approval from Congress?
So, one, I'm not disagreeing with you, but I hadn't myself noticed that line. But what I would point out is something slightly different, which is that on the view of the majority opinion, the United States began with the colonies. That is, it preceded the Constitution, and it continued through the Articles of Confederation and continued with the Constitution. It's not clear to me that that's right. So, given that there seems to be an odd position as to the persistence of the United States, I'm not sure that what follows is at least any good. If you start from a problematic premise, I'm not sure that anything that follows. But in addition, if it does say that you need the consent of the state for withdrawal, if it says that, that would be a good reason to think that you can't secede. It would also be in striking contradiction to other parts of the decision where it seems to say that that you may not succeed under any condition. So I'm not sure how to fit those two parts together. But in any case, like I said, my concern is more that the notion that the country began with the colonies, persisted through the Articles of Confederation, and then continued to exist the Constitution. I'm just not sure that's a plausible account of what made the United States the United States and when it began to exist. And again, once you start out with a mistaken premise about the persistence conditions for the United States, I'm not sure that conclusions with regard to whether or not states can leave are going to be undermined by that approach.
Fair enough. Well, let's talk a little bit, I think, about I don't have the article in front of me, but I did read it a couple times. I think towards the end, correct me if I'm wrong, you talked about forcing people under the same yoke. And I think hinting at, wow, people are very divisive. I think Pew polling has shown that the American political body is more divided than at any time since at least Vietnam. Some people have said the Civil War. You have people punching each other in the face in Portland, Oregon over political disagreements. Let me ask you two questions. Have you seen America this divided before? Is this pretty bad? Is this unique? And then what might be a solution to that that's peaceful?
Sure. So I have not seen the United States this divided. And I mean, it strikes me that the disagreements here are fairly fundamental. I mean, they disagree with regard to some very basic rights, particularly the right of free speech, the right to guns. Very much the sort of the issue with regard to the people who are going to constitute the United States, in particular, what to do with immigration. Should we have approaches that are relatively closed borders, relatively open borders, or somewhere in the middle? There's strong differences on race matters, things like race quotas, preferences, and reparations. There's big differences in terms of economic freedom. Should we socialize medicine? Should we socialize college education, and issues over foreign policy. That is, should the United States have an isolationist or an interventionist foreign policy? And people's positions seem to fit into two large worldviews. I'm sure plenty of people don't fit squarely into them, but as a general group, people seem to fit pretty square, seem to fit into these large views. At some point in time, if you have just strong disagreement over what sort of country you want to live in, I'm not sure what should be gained by having one country rather than, two different countries or even more. Again, when you allow the states a lot of flexibility so that the states could set up different systems and people could choose how to live by choosing the state to live in, that is a solution. But since one side at least does not want to give shape to that sort of expression, it's just not clear what's the gain by sort of forcing people to remain part of one country rather than being part of two different countries. So, for example, was there something to gain by forcing Yugoslavia to be one country, or have it be gained by forcing Iraq to be one country? It's not clear what we're gaining by doing that.
Right.
So, if that's correct, we should at least be open to the discussion of whether or not the country should split into two or more parts. And if so, one way, although not the only way this could be done, would be through succession.
Right. Right. I talk to a lot of liberals, a lot of conservatives around America, and I hear two people who don't talk to each other and yet have the same concern about the other one. I hear liberals here in California are terrified that conservative Supreme Court president and conservative Senate will pass a law that allows this open carry thing. So you go and you get a gun license in Alabama, and it's concealed carry, and you can just drive into New York or California. And we would never allow that in California. But if it's a federal law, then Joe Bob, can just drive right into California with his 6-shooter on his hip and goes, I got a license in Alabama. You have to accept it now. And people in California are scared of that. I mean, they are terrified of that. On the other hand, I have talked to conservatives. I'm a liberal. I'm out here in California, but I got family from Texas. And so I talked to some of my relatives. And one of the things is Alyssa Milano, who I like, she started the Me Too movement. She traveled to Georgia last 2 months and is protesting Georgia, saying she doesn't like their laws concerning abortion. And so she traveled there and she started protesting Georgia laws and saying you shouldn't do this, and I don't agree. And now she's trying to get everybody in California to ban travel to Georgia. And so here are these conservatives saying, I'm terrified of you Californians coming into my neighborhood and saying, I don't agree with whatever law you guys passed. I think it's wrong, so I'm just going to pressure you to undo what your voters decided. So when we have a country full of people who are terrified of right-wingers coming into their country with loaded weapons, and right-wing people, I mean, yes, we're there now. And then we have right-wing people scared of liberal Californians coming in and bossing them around on social justice issues. Do you see how that, I mean, this gets us to this point where it seems like people can't agree about basic stuff.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think there's some fundamental disagreements. And again, you see it in a number of issues. I think abortion, as you point out, is an extra one. So are guns. So are the degree to which you have things like amnesties and catch and release policies. Things like, do we have a single-payer medical system? Do we have the federal government pay out student loans? Do we have like a wealth tax? Do we continue to be involved in places like the Middle East, particularly places like Syria? Yeah, I just think that these families, like two different families of views, and I'm not sure what's the gain by saying, well, look, you have to work this out as a group. I mean, at some point in time, the differences get so great, it seems that on the whole, both sides would be happier if they could form their own set of norms. And one side should emphasize egalitarian considerations and a humanitarian foreign policy, and the other side can emphasize liberty considerations and an isolation of foreign policy. They could disagree in terms of how you interpret the Constitution, in essence, having two different versions of the Constitution. And I mean, again, the further people's preferences get away from each other, the more costly it is to both find a middle ground and to enforce it.
Yeah. So maybe amicable divorce might be a solution to keep people friendly.
Yeah, I mean, imagine you had a couple, and they were sort of, they were moderately religious, not especially religious. And one person, let's say the husband, becomes extremely religious and wants, religious norms to run the household from top to bottom. And let's say the wife becomes complete atheist and loses faith in both the religious tenet and the moral norms that accompany them. At some point in time, you say, look, unless there's like a further reason they should stay together, I mean, why should they make themselves suitable by staying in a marriage in which their preferences are so different that there's not a workable middle ground? And I'm not sure we're there in the United States yet, but the difference between the two sides are becoming increasingly, far apart. And so I'm not, at some point in time, what's the gain by sort of forcing these various states to work together when they just have a fundamental disagreement as to what it is that what's right and good with regard to the people and what relationship that has to the government.
Well, let me ask you, how do you feel the rest of New Yorkers feel? We're out here the other side of the continent. I've been to New York, great place, but it takes some effort to get out there. Do you feel that New Yorkers are sensing this huge gap and maybe warming up to the idea that some sort of divorce might be good?
I don't see any sense that New Yorkers are thinking about this. I don't see I don't see any awareness of this in terms of the newspaper articles, newspaper columns, discussions I have with people, discussions on the radio, discussions in bars, in classrooms. So in short, I don't see any awareness whatsoever in the state of New York. Now, That's not to say that maybe they should be, and maybe it would be a worthwhile thing for them to consider and talk about. But in terms of are they actually thinking about it, I think the answer is no.
When we look at the presidential debates, we see, I've watched all of them, and Slate did a great article talking about how they are delusional when it comes to them thinking they're actually going to pass their policy agenda because of a conservative Supreme Court. Are liberals, do you think, New Yorkers, others, thinking, hey, we'll get Trump out, we'll elect somebody, they'll pass all this progressive legislation and everything goes back to normal, and they are not recognizing that the center of America is hardcore red, dominates the Senate, and now you have a Supreme Court that's majority conservative, and collectively that allows them to just block every single good idea that progressive America may want to have, and a complete unwillingness or just separate living in a different universe amongst presidential candidates who say they're going to do free college and tax the rich and do sanctuary cities everywhere, and all those decisions have to be approved by a now conservative Supreme Court. Do you feel that liberals and perhaps New Yorkers are aware that the system isn't going to allow their progressive vision to be realized?
So I do not know what New Yorkers as a whole, I just haven't seen polling results on those matters. I do think, I'm not sure the court is that much of a block on federal policy, but I do think the red states very much want to block the progressive agenda, and because of the structure of the Senate, there's a good chance they'll be able to do so. But in short, I don't know what New Yorkers, on the whole, if they're kind of aware that these sort of progressive ideas that you see in the Democrat debate are probably going to be blocked. I'm also just not sure to what degree the places in your state support those policies. And I just don't know if they want to, for example, have a single payer medical system, or whether they want sort of all education get wiped out, or they want sort of restrictions on political spending as a way to fight corruption, with a possible incursion to the First Amendment. So, short version, I don't know. But I think that you raised an important point, which is, look, the progressive agenda at this point in time is quite ambitious, and people believe very strongly in it. You might, on one account, you might think, look, people have a right to some degree to have a sort of system that fits their values and their needs. It just might be the case that the people in Montana and the people in, Connecticut, they just don't see that. They don't see the role of government in the same way, and their vision is so different that it's a little unclear what's to be gained by forcing them to say, okay, the representatives of Montana sit down with the representatives of Connecticut, let's see what we can arrive at. Is there even a middle ground that they can arrive at? I mean, you might be just, other than just a stalemate, just sort of rocking the status quo. It's not clear that there's common ground between, let's say, the representatives of a place like Idaho or Montana and those of a place like, Connecticut or Massachusetts.
Huh. Okay. That's really good. Okay. Winding down, is there any comments, things you'd like to leave the audience with, or any websites or issues that are important to you that you'd like to make sure they know about?
I just like to point out, kind of reiterate the point I thought you made, which is it's kind of an odd feature of all of it, in that you would think that the Constitution would have explicitly addressed it, and it's failure to explicitly address it. It's especially odd, given that they knew it was a real issue. One other thing I'd mention is that if you just two other quick things. One is that in law, people are standardly allowed withdraw from partnership. Now they might pay damages, but we don't sort of lock them into a legal partnership thing that you may not leave. Similarly, in contract law, if the people who make the contract both misunderstand the material term and neither is at fault, as a legal matter, we say there's no meeting of the minds and hence the contract is void. If you disagree about whether or not a state can leave the union, that's pretty close to having a misunderstanding of material term of contract.
Huh.
So, if we think about analogies to other in the law, it looks like you can withdraw from, partnerships. It looks like you have to have at least some shared understanding of the contract to which you're entering. One last thing, and that is, we generally think succession is a good thing. I mean, does anyone think that it was wrong or bad for the Soviet Union to dissolve into other countries?
Good point.
The same thing with countries like, Algeria, Brazil, Haiti, India, Jamaica, Kenya, Nigeria, Pakistan, Peru, and so on. Generally, look, it's a good thing that these countries were allowed to, in essence, succeed from a larger and more powerful country. If we think that self-determination is right and good in these other cases, why wouldn't self-determination be right and good with regard to states? That is, if we do think self-determination is right and good, in these other instances, it's not clear why we shouldn't reason in a parallel manner with regard to states.
I love it. Okay, one last question I gotta ask.
Sure.
So over here in California, I'm sure you've heard Cal exit, and they go, we don't like Trump, and we might want to do our own thing. Well, one of the things that the newspapers here in California talk about is California should never, even if it was legal and peaceful, which is the only way I'm interested in talking about this topic. But let's say California could go legally, peacefully. They go to Congress. Congress says, sure, go. Maybe not everybody, but a majority of the votes. And we'll still trade. We're still allies. Everything's all good. No anger, just a amicable, hey, let's part ways. Some people here in California say, but you're abandoning New York. And New Yorkers need California to push our values in Congress so that we can save New Yorkers. I mean, they literally use the phrase, you New Yorkers need us Californians to save you. I'm not making this up. How does that strike you as a New Yorker that some Californians say that?
It strikes me as I'm not saying it provides an all things considered, good reason for California to avoid speeding, but it does seem to be a legitimate consideration in the sense that were California to law, you certainly would get a very different outcome with regard to what's left in the country. And the same thing is true if Texas, for example, were to withdraw, right? You cut in the other direction.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, I think that's a legitimate consideration. But I think you might think, if anything, California would be setting precedents for other states to join it. And perhaps that's the clearest, under the case where they voluntarily submit to leave, and the courts can block it. You might think, yeah, I mean, look, sometimes the way to make important changes is to first change yourself and then invite others to join you. So while I do think that's a legitimate consideration, I'm not sure that is a sufficiently strong moral reason to avoid seceding.
That's awesome. I just wanted to see how you said it because we talked to another liberal New Yorker about last month, and he said the exact same thing. He said, if you guys leave, maybe you set a more powerful example for America to be progressive than staying here and trying to get legislation passed, but you can't actually do it. That literally, almost the exact same thing. I'll send you the video of that. Okay, thank you very much. Any last websites or things or any contact information you'd like to give? You don't have to.
No, if people want to reach me, I'm available at the Fredonia website. But no, I appreciate your interest, and thank you for interviewing me.
Thank you, Professor.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.